Hey guys, it's Tuesday again, and today's theme is fairy tales. But before I talk about the theme, I do want to say something. Yesterday I was looking at my old blog and finding, stuff, because I had old stories on there that I wanted to think of reviving. And one of them was from back in summer 2008, and I realized that all of you have actually read them. And it also made me realize how long we've known each other now. It's almost been 2 years. This summer will be 2 years. I met Davis first, and Mariah, of course Mariah. And then everybody else came along after. And so we've pretty much known each other for 2 years, guys. So I just thought I'd share that little tidbit with you. And now on to the theme of fairy tales.
If I could look across the country, from California to New Jersey.
Okay, so fairy tales. Now, most people think that fairy tales are all happily ever after and lighthearted endings. But that wasn't always the case, especially when it came to Grimm's fairy tales and the Grimm brothers. And I am going to read a classic example of that. The Singing Bone. Once upon a time, great complaints were made in a certain country of a wild boar, which laid waste to the fields of the peasants, killed the cattle, and often tore to pieces the inhabitants. The king promised a great reward to whoever should free the land of this plague, but the beast was so big and strong, and no one durst venture in the neighborhood of the forest where it raged. At last, the king allowed it to be proclaimed that whoever should kill the wild boar should have his only daughter in marriage. Now, there lived in this country 2 brothers, the sons of a poor man, and they each wished to undertake the adventure. The elder, who was bold and brave out of pride. The younger, who was innocent and ignorant from a good heart. They agreed that they might the sooner find the boar, that they should enter the forest on the opposite sides. So the elder departed in the evening, and the other on the following morning. When the younger had gone a short way, a little dwarf stepped up to him, holding a black spear in his hand, and said, "I give you this spear because your heart is innocent and good. With it you may boldly attack the boar, who can do you no harm." He thanked the dwarf, and taking the spear went forth bravely. In a little while he perceived the wild boar, which ran straight at him, but he held the spear in front of his body, so that in its blind fury it rushed on so rashly that its heart was pierced quite through. Then he took the beast upon his shoulders and went homewards to show it to the king. However, just as he came out on the other side of the forest, there stood on the outskirts of a house where the people were making merry, dancing and drinking. His elder brother was amongst them, exciting his courage by wine, and never thinking at all that the boar might be killed by any other than himself. As soon, therefore, as he saw his younger brother coming out of the forest laden with his booty, his envious and ill-natured heart had no rest. Still he called to him, "Come in here, my dear brother, and rest and strengthen yourself with a cup of wine." The younger brother, suspecting no evil, went in and related his story of the good little dwarf who had given him the spear, wherewith he had killed the boar. The elder brother detained him till evening, and then they went away together. But when they came in the darkness to a bridge over a stream, the elder, letting his brother pass on before till he came to the middle of the bridge, gave him a blow which felled him dead. Then he buried him in the sand below the bridge, and taking the boar, brought it to the king, representing that he had killed it, and so received in marriage the princess. He declared, moreover, that the boar had torn in pieces the body of his younger brother, and as he did come back, everyone believed the tale to be true. But because nothing is hidden from God's sight, so also this black deed at last came to light. Many years after, as a peasant was driving his herd across the brook, he saw lying in the sand below a snow-white bone, which he thought would make a good mouthpiece. So he stepped down, took it up, and fashioned it into a mouthpiece for his horn. But as soon as he blew through it for the first time, to the great astonishment of the herdsman, the bone began to sing of itself. "My brother slew me, and buried my bones under the sand and under the stones. I killed the boar as he came from his lair, but he won the prize of the fair lady fair." "What wonderful little bone!" exclaimed the herdsman. "It sings of itself. I must take it to the king." As soon as he came before the king, it began to repeat its song, and the king understood it perfectly. So He caused the earth below the bridge to be dug up, and therefore all the bones of the younger brother came to light. The wicked brother could not deny the deed, and for his punishment he was sewed up in a sack and drowned. And the bones of the other brother were placed in a splendid tomb in the churchyard. The end. Okay, so I just read The Singing Bone, which is one of Grimm's fairy tales, written by the Grimm brothers, Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. And they wrote a lot of fairy tales. As you can see, this book, it's pretty thick. And their fairy tales weren't very happy. They didn't really have happily ever afters. They were the masterminds behind the original Cinderella, in which the stepsisters cut off their toes, their heels, anything to fit in the shoes, and in the end, they went blind because that was their punishment. And they were also responsible for Hansel and Gretel. I mean, the kids going off into the woods and being lured in by a witch who wanted to eat them. And the original Snow White, they were responsible for a lot of very dark fairy tales. Disney made a lot of these fairy tales into the happily ever after endings and happy-go-lucky. But that wasn't why they were written or how they were written. When they were written for the moral values. They were written to scare kids into learning the lesson that was behind them. And Disney and a lot of other places have made newer versions of those and happily ever after and made them into these happy-go-lucky tales that they just aren't. You need to read the originals. I mean, that's what was intended. I mean, Hans Christian Andersen wrote The Little Mermaid. And in the end of The Little Mermaid, she turns to sea foam. She doesn't end up with Prince Eric. She turns to sea foam and dies. Like, that was meant to teach a lesson. Not this, oh my god, they're gonna get married in the end and everything's gonna be happily ever after. Because that isn't life. Life isn't happily ever after. I'm sorry if that sounds really pessimistic or undynamic, but life isn't happily ever after. You need to teach kids some reality and not make them sit there and think that they're going to have these fairy tale endings to all their stories. Because yeah, some might have, their happily ever after, but others might not. And that is my point. That fairy tales are not meant to always be happily ever after. They have other points and they have other reasons that they were created. So I think that's about it. Amy, I'll see you tomorrow.